We're really thrilled to be here today and to really dive into what relationship philanthropy has with advocacy. Of course, we as a panel have spent time talking about this, so it's not just the process and the conversation here in the room, but also the conversation we've been able to have as colleagues to prepare for this, and it's been really special, and we're excited to now welcome you into the conversation. To get started, we're all going to introduce ourselves. We're going to share our name, our professional roles, something fun and interesting about our lives, and where we live and why we're here today. My name is Manuel Cawaling. Many people call me Manny. I'm the executive director for Inspire Washington. We are and as well as the great state of Washington's cultural advocacy organization. We believe in the uplifting power of science, heritage, and the arts. For every Washington community. Our tent is big. We support cultural nonprofits with missions in science, heritage, and the arts, as well as the broad creative economy. That could be your kid that loves music, that formed a band, or your best friend that is throwing pots in the San Juans, or all the great writers along the Palouse. Something fun and interesting about my life. A year ago, I was on a sabbatical. Take rest, everyone. We all need it. I was on a 3-month rest, and when I was in the Philippines, I got this great jacket. And today, work is really tiring, and it seems like my sabbatical was a long time ago. So sometimes I pull something out that I bought along the way across the world, just to remind myself about how important rest is. I live in Seattle, Washington. I'm a third-generation Seattleite and Washingtonian. I am here today because I'm a curious and kind of nerdy person. I love information, and what does that mean is that I absorb a lot. And in these days right now, that absorption is also really exhausting me, and it's making me shut down a little bit. So I have to remind myself, and why I'm here in this room with you, that it's also about being generative and imagining and creating a world as opposed to just simply absorbing the state of play. That's why I'm here with you today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lou Hill, or Lucretia. I am the Community Engagement and Strategy Director for Waters Meet, formerly known as Empire Health Foundation. That's located in Eastern Washington. We serve 7 counties in Eastern Washington and 3 tribes. We are focused on serving Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led nonprofits and activist organizations. I should also mention that I'm also a founding board president of LGBTQ or 2S LGBTQIA plus center called Spectrum, and it is one of the only Black and Indigenous and people of color-led centers in Spokane. I can also share that I am the 5th generation of my family who was born in Eastern Washington in the Hilliard community, which we are very proud of. I did move away to come back because you have to do that. And I guess an interesting fact about me is that I am a horse girl, and if I let you show you pictures of my horse, I will talk your ear off for way too much about my said horses. But they are definitely what bring me great joy and really help me, I think, manage my emotional regulation. To be with a horse gives you a great opportunity to be thoughtful of your quake or the energy that you put out and how people respond. A horse can feel your heartbeat from 4 feet away. So they feel you before they receive you. And so it definitely gives me an opportunity to continue to lean into being a person ready to be in community.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Hopper. Excited to be here today. I'm the CEO of Sound Philanthropy, where we work with donors who are committed to better philanthropy and bigger impact. Our methodology is to listen, assess, recommend and implement, and we do that all centered around community and values. Let's see, I live on Bainbridge Island. I'm actually 3rd-generation Bainbridge Islander, but did go away also and had to go away to come back to the Rock. And something interesting about me, the thing that really is really on my mind right now is that I just dropped my oldest at college on Monday. So nobody talk about college or kids going to college, or I might start crying. But yeah, we'll focus on the horses. Focus on the horses. So and then let's see. I'm here today. I love the challenge of inspiring a group of people in the last panel of the day on a sunny Friday.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Hello, my name is Shana Dall'Osto. I'm the Executive Director of the Roots and Wings Foundation. I have worked in the nonprofit sector for the last 25 years and have led foundations for the last 12. I live in Seattle, but grew up in Wisconsin. Perhaps there's a few other Midwestern transplants here today. The year that I was born, my mom started a company called Epic, which does healthcare software, best known for MyChart. In 2015, my mom, Judy, signed the Giving Pledge and committed 99% of her wealth to charity. Go, Mom. Yeah, thanks. So Roots and Wings is the vehicle to make that happen. And at Roots and Wings, we are trying to help children have a strong start in life. That's their roots, so they can reach their full potential, the wings. I spend my days learning about complex issues around healthcare, early childhood, housing, justice. And not one of those issues can be solved by one person or one entity. It takes nonprofit, private, public sectors. So today, I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of the lessons that we have learned as a family foundation about what you can do to support advocacy, and some ways, big and small, that you can advocate for the change that you want. And fun fact about me, I am obsessed with Ultimate Frisbee, and I play year-round.
I love this. Hi, everyone. I'm Lilliane Ballesteros, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director of Latino Community Fund of Washington State. Yay! And our work is really rooted around three pillars. We are investing in our Latino communities across the state of Washington, connecting them to resources. We do a lot around connecting our community to health resources, working with small businesses, and then moving into leadership development. We have a pretty robust youth leadership program where youth are engaging in a civic engagement program. They are really building solutions in their local communities, and then we do advocacy. Big A, little a, sideways A, italics A, bold A. So the last pillar is really our civic engagement. We are down in Olympia talking to our legislators. We're also telling our legislators to come into our communities and hear directly from the people they represent. And so while we are doing our philanthropy work and investing in our community, really our focus at the end is to build power with our communities, right? To actually transform the policies that impact people's lives and have our local leaders be at the forefront of creating not just the needs, right? Not just bringing up what is needed, but actually building out the solutions. So that's our work. We're in Yakima County primarily and King County, although our giving and work has reached multiple counties across the state. And then fun fact, I guess. Yes, I was thinking about this. We are in oyster season, and I am an oyster gal, and I have guided 2 people. I just realized this. I'm going to start keeping count. I've guided 2 people to eat their first oysters and actually enjoy them. So, I feel very proud of that. My friend is like, you described it, and now I like it. Like, you told me what it was going to be, and perfect. I was like, wonderful. Who's next?
Thank you. Let's give our panel a round of applause. Show the love. I am so honored to moderate this session with these really smart, thoughtful, and fun leaders. So the first question, Why should philanthropy engage in advocacy? And how does it differ from traditional grant making? Why is advocacy so misunderstood or feared? How do you see advocacy as a tool to meet the current moment and address systemic inequities? That's a lot of questions in there. You can answer whichever one you'd like. And why don't we get started with Lilliane?
Okay, I'm going to touch on maybe one and then. And I'm realizing the why I'm here actually ties perfectly into this. I think I'm just going to get into it. It's Friday afternoon, but we are, I think, in this place so clearly that we have this mandate that this is not about just nonprofits stepping up. This is not just about community organizers, but that the role of philanthropy for me is to really step into this space. There is a lot of power in philanthropy. There is a lot of ideas. And I think the mandate is to do the little and big A advocacy. And I think that speaks to also why I'm here, because that easier said than done, right? And we do that, I think, by building really strong community with each other, where we have the different lanes that we're all working on, but we are building that community together to actually step up at a time. And we're not in a unique time, and we are in a unique time, right? That we have this mandate to actually not just do the traditional around grant making. One of the things that really struck me in 2020, we were doing a lot of work around the census, and it hadn't even sat with me that a lot of our philanthropy is based on data from the census, right? And so when we're looking at health outcomes, when we're looking at zip codes across the state, when we're looking at the issues and hearing from community bringing this to life, that actually it is already rooted in advocacy, right? Because there was a big battle in 2020. I'll get into it later. There were lawsuits. We were part of some around the citizenship question, and it is so intricately tied together. So I think there is this mandate for philanthropy to step into the space, and bold letters.
Yeah. Thank you. Shana?
So as I was preparing for this, I was trying to center myself in what is advocacy. And advocacy can mean so many different things. And I think, like you just said, they are all important and all needed right now. At its core, I think about to advocate is to share a message for a purpose. And whether that purpose is policy change or behavior change, there are so many different ways you can approach it. And even if you're not going to do the big A advocacy, the big policy campaigns, you can still support those who do, right? As funders, that's something we can do. And at Roots and Wings, we are not the experts, and our staff have limited capacity. And so we aren't the ones out front supporting or running the campaigns, but we are funding the people who are, whether it's ongoing advocacy or a campaign. And then we can amplify their messages. So we can amplify our partners' messages through our platforms, and we can convene other funders and other nonprofits when it's helpful. And for every issue that we support, healthcare, early childhood justice, we fund both direct service and advocacy. And those buckets for advocacy continue growing. So we're trying to help those in need today, and we're trying to prevent others from needing help tomorrow. So what do we as funders look for when we're considering funding a new advocacy effort? Organizations that actively speak up. You hear about them, you read their quotes. They communicate regularly, and their messages are clear. You understand what they're saying. They collaborate with other nonprofits and with the community, and they connect regularly with lawmakers.
So I'm going to take a little bit of I'm going to step back a little bit with my response and talk a little bit about the philanthropic landscape or field from a structural and technical standpoint. And I'll bring it back around to advocacy. Hopefully it will all flow towards that. But when you think about philanthropy, specifically 501c3, so the philanthropic dollars to public charities that result in a tax benefit to the donor, those dollars, whether they come through a foundation or a donor advised fund or directly, are already restricted. There's no such thing as a 100% unrestricted grant when you're giving to 501c3. So I think that that's grant making. Grant making is supporting programs, operations, capital, endowments through 501c3 giving, where the first benefit and the primary benefit is to the donor, not to the recipient. And so inherent in that is a lack of advocacy already in the way that most of us do our giving. So if you think about, if we were to think about that structure, that another example of a system that is based in benefiting the privileged, benefiting white institutions, if we think about that structure and what it would look like to turn that on its head and have access to knowledge and information and advice from our advisors around what does philanthropy really look like when it's truly touching all of the parts that it needs to in order to affect change. So with coming back to the question around grant making and advocacy and a little bit about why there's fear and misunderstanding, if grant making is about supporting operations, programs, capital campaigns, et cetera, that we all support, advocacy starts to interrupt the power structure that's inherent in that 501c3 giving. Advocacy means that we are putting the needs and the voices of the communities that we are trying to uplift, that we are trying to support, that we are trying to walk alongside. We are putting their needs before, essentially, before our tax benefit. Because private foundations cannot give to C4s. Donor advised funds cannot give to C4s. Individual donors can, without the tax benefit. So all this to say that I think, and you'll hear this theme with some of the responses to some of the other questions as well, because I think that there is a role in advocacy. You know, I have these amazing panelists that I'm sitting with up here who have incredible insight and firsthand knowledge around really important and impactful advocacy work. There's another level of advocacy that we as privileged, as primarily white privileged people can talk about in our circles with our advisors, and that's around advocacy that results in systems change at the level of estate planning, at the level of tax structure, at the level of how we think about and define philanthropy. So the last thing I'll say, just as an example of this, is that conservative philanthropy has done this really, really well. They have sustained this since the 1960s. They have taken advantage of every level of taxable philanthropy or non-taxable philanthropy, from C3s to C4s to PAC organizations, political action committee organizations, to direct investments, obviously, in media, in academia, and there are case studies that date back to the 70s describing this very sustained, very intentional, very patient process. And what we are seeing today is, in my opinion, and the opinion of other people who are smarter than me, kind of the result of that. And so I encourage you to just sort of do your own research and digging if that's something of interest to you. And I think that if there's something that more left-leaning progressive philanthropists can learn from where we are today and from the right, it's around this really incredible work that they've done to get where they are today that we may not agree with, but has stemmed from a more holistic approach to philanthropy.
To answer this question, I also have to ground in some real privilege in the philanthropic entity that I'm on. We're endowed. And so we're significantly endowed. We're the largest endowed foundation east of the Cascades, and we have a C3 and a C4. And so it really does make it easy for us to play in both yards. I will also share that everything is inherently political, and for us not to use our privilege of philanthropy, which is insanely privileged, unless you've been working in this space, you don't understand how privileged this space is. And if we are not using that privilege to advocate for the solutions that our direct service organizations are solving, then we are missing so much opportunity. And it hasn't been until the last 5 or 6 years where we've really been able to see an opportunity to push the level on that and to really push for our C3s to understand that you can talk to lawmakers. Yes, you cannot endorse a candidate, and yes, you cannot give money, but there's a lot of room to have a lot of conversations. And philanthropy has a unique position because people like to work with us because we have lots of money, to create those opportunities for conversations and to have those lived experiences be reflective in those policies. Many of the policies challenges that we have right now were from good intention, not understanding the real impact to humans for those policies. I would also have to mention that it is with our privilege that we have to work within this space and understanding, and this is kind of the gooey spot that we're in as a philanthropic entity of understanding where our privilege starts. How do we work with our community members who are in the trenches to understand when do you want us to push? When do we use our privilege to move a policy, the big ones and the little ones, forward? And so that's been kind of the fun place that we've gotten the opportunity to be in, is to understand how we're leveraging that C3 and that C4 arm to the benefit of the realities that our partners are facing. And so, can you ask me the question one more time, just to make sure I didn't.
Why is advocacy so misunderstood or feared? How do you see advocacy as a tool to meet the current moment?
And that is, we are meeting the current moment. And I think that we have to hire and listen to people who have lived experience. You talked about census data. I grew up in the 99207 zip code, was the most economically depressed zip code in our state. And I would be remiss to not mention that my sister is also a state representative and the first Black state representative of the 3rd Legislative District of Washington State. And she had to beat a white man to get that position. And what we're seeing reflected in her role is a deep understanding and actual relationship with many of the partners that are for us, by us, that are delivering services in our community. And it means a lot when Verla from the Way to Justice is ticked off about how something's going and can directly connect with their state representative, who they don't have to explain or justify their reality to. She already knows. She knows intimately what Verla goes through, what she lived through, and what her clients and the people who come to her for services are experiencing. I cannot say it enough, and this is one area that we're struggling with, is the direct support of candidates. We have a C4. We have the ability to develop a PAC, and we're still moving our board in that direction. And I would also be remiss if I didn't say this has been a long, long approach. This started Empire Health Foundation, now Waters Meet, 6 years ago, we had new leadership. And I can share that I was in philanthropy pre-new leadership, and it was the worst place ever. And I went to the private sector because of that, because it wasn't a place that listened to direct impact and direct experiences, but instead felt they had the idea to do better and serve a community because they don't know what they need. And every time you talk to a person in need, they can tell you exactly what they need. They can also tell you what policies are hindering their ability to do what they need to do. And I think in philanthropy, that is our job. We get to, because we have the resources, and we still lived in a very capitalist society where money talks and bullshit walks, and we get to use our money and our privilege to do just that.
You know, I really love this question. One of the ways that it plays out for me at Inspire Washington is we put out lots of requests and take donor meetings. And I do hear, you know, Manny, we really love what you do, but it's your advocacy work that makes us uncomfortable. And a lot of that, as we've shared, is a lack of information. Take the time to ask the questions. We do this work, so we have created the pathways for that. So that's always a little bit frustrating to me. And also, for many of us, I know at Inspire Washington, I'm not embarrassed to say, yes, we do grassroots advocacy. Yes, we lobby because we think children need to be able to play an instrument if they want to. It's one of my favorite lines in a congressional office. It's like, yeah, we are here to lobby, and it's about all good things. Another thing is that all the things that keep you up at night, other issues that are driving forward and starting to take shape and you may feel is threatening to the world that you live in, guess what? People or other organizations or businesses are contributing to that. We should be able to do the same thing and contribute to the world that we want to create, the world that we want to live in. And then I would just close out by saying that why is advocacy a tool to meet the current moment and address systemic inequities? Just at the heart of, let's get away from words of advocacy and lobbying. What we're doing is we're encouraging conversation, flow of ideas, right? The things that we are asking for will require a lot of conversation and inevitably agreement. We need to talk more in this world. We need to move through the things we disagree about. So therefore, it's important to have the resources for the people that are doing that work so that we can get to a solution together. All right, the next question is, give us an example of a time when advocacy helped move legislation or pursued an opportunity, took a risk, or did something uncomfortable to shift your work or the work of the community you serve, and what was its impact? It's a big question again. Would you like to start over there?
Oh, okay, sure. Started last time. And I love this because we've had this experience. 2 years ago, the city wanted a new jail. We said no. No, we didn't say no. Our community said no. And so we started the Justice Not Jails campaign. And this was really the first endeavor of our C4. And it made our C3 board very uncomfortable. They got doxxed by the right wing, and they didn't identify our C4 board. They identified our C3 board, which happened to have a judge on it. So you can imagine judges do not like to be engaged in a lot of these policy areas. So yes, did we learn a lot? Absolutely. But what we also did is we won. We got that measure dropped, and now we're currently working in a more collective space to not just build a new jail, but secure funding for mental health services, to reserve money for substance use disorders. That is what we're doing now. And so we not only were able to stop a bill or stop a funding opportunity that the folks that we served did not feel served them, because the way that it was written kept it very vague. The money was going directly to the police force, and we already said, and I'm not afraid to say, that we defund police. And with that, we didn't need another jail. And we learned a lot, and it was really uncomfortable. We had for us, by us people at the forefront of that campaign, and they were doxxed. Their criminal histories were smeared all over our community, and it was really hard. But we didn't back down, and instead, we addressed the challenges that we faced so we could continue to do that level of policy work. And we will continue to do that. In the new iteration of this opportunity, the jail is not the focus. The mental health and additional services to our community is the focus. And so there are opportunities. It will be messy, and you will absolutely be uncomfortable. And it's not to focus on the discomfort, but to do that inner work to understand where that discomfort is coming from. You know, what kinds of things have we believed into our soul that allow these things to be okay? And what I really push on is that those who are feeling uncomfortable need to be given a space to really investigate why they're uncomfortable. Because it would have not have benefited our community to have another jail. But it does benefit our community to go into a collaborative process with diverse thinkers to think about what those dollars could really be used for, so we don't see people end up in jail who need mental health services, who need substance abuse disorder services, who need homes, and who need care. and allowing and providing. And I think this is the other piece. When you have for us, by us folks at the forefront, your responsibility in philanthropy is to care for them. Care for them emotionally, and that's also what came from that. What kind of social emotional services do our leaders need to ensure they can continue to do that work and not burn out? What kind of technology support? Western State Center came in that tracks white supremacists. They were able to connect us with services to protect their digital identities. And so that's other things that we learned along the way, is like, we have to protect the people that we ask to work within their lived experience, and understand that, yes, you're gonna find out what their criminal histories might be, and with that, you are going to have to continue to work and understand that those criminal histories also give them great and valuable insight to help us make better decisions about how we serve and develop solutions for community.
That's beautiful. I'm going to be very brief because I know that my amazing panelists alongside me have some really great stories, and I will just say, in all honesty, the clients that we work with are all using vehicles that that don't allow, to my earlier points, direct advocacy, direct lobbying, but my team and I are in constant conversation, in constantly pushing and challenging them and educating them on what is possible, what it does look like to expand beyond the 501c3 giving, and finding ways that we can support, whether it's through trust-based practices, I think, are a form of advocacy in their own right. And the other thing, that the example that I would mention that certainly did not cause any discomfort, and I think discomfort is growth, and so I think we all need to embrace it, and we also work with our clients on that. But the one thing that each of our clients has done with their grantees is to provide wellness grants, which, sort of thinking about Manny and his sabbatical, where he got this lovely jacket and really had time to sort of restore and refuel. And we are not doing the work. I'm not doing the work. My clients are not doing the work. The work that Lou is talking about is hard and draining, and it burns you out a lot faster than I think any of us could possibly imagine. And so making wellness grants, telling others in the philanthropic field about how important wellness grants are, I think is one way to really show up.
Thank you, Sarah. And +1 to wellness grants, capacity grants, and also trust-based philanthropy. So we support a lot of organizations that have both a C3 and C4. I wanted to share briefly about a campaign that we're currently supporting, and then also one word of caution. This year we're supporting Brady, which is a national nonprofit that has a C3, C4, to run a statewide campaign in Wisconsin on safe gun storage and suicide prevention. It's called End Family Fire. The State Department of Public Health is involved, and this will be one of the department's biggest efforts around reducing gun violence. So one note of caution, and I think this ties to what my other panelists have been talking about the importance of listening to and working with community and alongside community. Brady first tried this campaign in the state of Missouri and hit some bumps in the road because they came in as a national nonprofit with tested messages for their campaign. And they got funding from a local foundation. But they didn't reach out to many of the groups working on the issue on the ground, and so they didn't have local buy-in. And when the campaign started, they got pushback and weren't as effective as they could have been. So fast forward to second version of the campaign. In Wisconsin, we're supporting Brady to spend a year building grassroots involvement and an advisory board that includes veterans, tribal members, and hunting organizations, some examples. And these partnerships are key. They're important, especially in a gun-friendly state like Wisconsin. So just as you're considering some efforts to support finding the organizations that have those local connections and partnerships that they're going to need to be successful and be heard.
I have like so many responses too, hearing everybody. So I'll talk a little bit about our census work in 2020. I think that for me is such a great example of the tie-in with philanthropy, with organizing, just really long-term investment and what community has built. So going into the census, Washington State was going to be drastically underfunded in terms of doing outreach to actually make sure that communities across the state were being counted. And it was 2020, it was very difficult, all of the combo of everything going on, nobody's opening their doors, nobody's out in community, nobody's in person, right? And so we were really looking and saying, we are going to be so drastically undercounted and are not going to be properly represented in the state of Washington. And so at the legislature, what was happening is those resources were not coming. And it wasn't until community groups, BIPOC-led, from community went and advocated and pushed on the legislators to say, we need more resources to make sure that our communities are counted. And that was community groups. And what ended up happening, my short version of this, because there's a lot of moving pieces, I'll say, is that we won, right? We were able to actually secure more millions than we had previously seen was coming. And the second part, and it wasn't over, right? It wasn't over. The second part was that the state then released an RFP to actually get groups to sign up to do the work, right? To have trusted messengers actually show up at those doors, have those conversations. And so we worked at the time, it was us, Nalihi Fund, Seattle Foundation, and we said, to the point of tools, Sarah, I'm so interested in the piece, like the right is building, right? We act like, we buy our houses, we get our car, we're so organized on things, and then we talk about advocacy, and we're like, no, we don't know how to do it. It's like, you can do it, and there are compliance, and it's not easy, and you can still do it, right? We can still give, whether you're going through a foundation, an individual donor, you can still resource it. And so at the time, we said, what's the avenue here, right? And so we collectively applied, got funds to then do the work, and said, for us, it was, as Latino Community Fund, what is the role we can play here? We aren't in every part of the state, and yet what we can do is we can fiscally sponsor groups, we can support infrastructure, we can move money, we can make sure that people are not having to deal with state reports. So we stepped in that way with the partners, and Seattle Foundation, this was an example of who has more power here, and how do we actually use that power in a way that is collective to get to our goal? And so during 2020, we moved money to 30 organizations across the state for them to actually do on-the-ground outreach, to actually organize, to talk with their community. And then from this, the Washington Census Alliance emerged. And it was a group of BIPOC organizations from across the state that were focused on census work. Fast forward, right? So we all get together, we do this work, we increase the count in Washington State, but it wasn't just about that. It was about, we have now built out a network across the state with hundreds of trusted messengers who have been paid, who have been invested in, who are now talking about the issues and moving through COVID, because that's what was happening, is that it wasn't just about going and talking about the count, it was, what else do you need? What else do you not have access to? What else do you think our communities need? Moving into Central Washington in Yakima, what came out of that is there had been years of voting rights lawsuits. Immigrant rights groups like One America, the Washington Buses here, who do work in community, really we're looking and saying there is no representation in this part of the state. Washington State is over 13% Latino, but there are communities in Central Washington that are over 95% Latino, and there had not been Latino representation. And Latino representation that is about actually what communities need, what farm workers need, right? What workers need, what families, what young people need. And so we were part of, there were multiple voting rights lawsuits that happened in Central Washington, and that was another example of where can we do some advocacy in the more capital A, building off of what we've done. While it may not seem that it is advocacy, it was advocacy to be at those doors. And it was advocacy to move that money in a way that actually built statewide infrastructure. Redistricting followed. What we found last year, we had 3 really strong Latina candidates run for office. Again, groups like the bus were out knocking on doors. There were C4s. We also have a C4. So when we're talking about the tools, I'm trying to illustrate this, that it's like there are so many different ways that we use those tools. And to be honest, our candidates did not win, right? And they closed the gap more than anyone had previously. And those conversations back at the doors, we're going back again. Those groups are going back again. And so when we're talking about one thing, when we're talking about advocacy and saying, well, maybe it's too scary to get into the census work, or maybe we don't want to really deal with voting rights lawsuits, the investment, and the investment in community groups, that was not by accident. That's a 10-year plan, right? That is decades plans. And so when we're doing this investment in community, even if we're thinking, well, we can't be part of that piece of it, community is already built it out. And what actually happened was the infrastructure was built, right? That's what the resources were able to do. It was the trust and the investment to say, right now, what we need are philanthropic groups going down to Olympia to push on legislators to make sure that there's funding for the census. Then what we need is to move that money so that we don't have all these restrictions and all these barriers. Then what we need is we need C4 dollars, and we need the C4s to be built up in a place like Central Washington. Then what we need is individual donors to give to those candidates, right? And so there are so many different tools. That's such an example to me of Washington Sense Alliance then became the Washington Community Alliance, who now runs data across the state of Washington, voter data. And it is community. It is community owned. They're sitting with the groups and saying, what is the data you need so that we can be strategic, so that we can build? So I think that's an example of there were so many ways to engage throughout that process, and there continue to be, but communities already got it in terms of the idea, right? They're not looking at one lawsuit. They're looking at representation down the way. They're looking at what does it mean if we change the city council, and if we actually are represented, what does that mean for our young people in school, right? What does it mean about the school board election in 10 years from now? So that long-term vision, it exists. And I think that there are so many ways to plug into something that already exists.
I would just add to what you're saying in terms of like, the community also already knows, and sometimes it is just providing those additional resources. We've partnered with Repower, which provides campaign training, and we have sent, I believe, at least, I think we're at 50 or 60 Black, Indigenous, and people of color folks to these trainings. And so we're also building capacity in the ability to manage a campaign, digital organizing on the ground, and really making sure that they have the skills and support. Repower centers Black leadership in campaigns, and if you've ever been to Spokane, it can be very white, and it's a hard place to be a person of color. And what we see coming from the folks who go to the women of color trainings is refueled, not just refueled, but reskilled, and understanding how they can push back. So many women of color specifically are really afraid to get involved in the advocacy space because they're afraid it will hurt their jobs. And so being able to create space for them to to engage in various different ways of campaign work allowed them to see themselves in those campaigns, which made a huge difference. And I always like to go back, activism works, like advocacy movement work. My sister is an attorney by trade, but 2020, I will tell you, radicalized her. I was just telling the story of that, she, coming from the community that we came from, she was told that if you just go to school and you get good grades and, she thought, well, I'll just be a lawyer. And so she left UW with $1,000 of debt, went to South LA and got her law degree and passed the California bar at 23 years old. And she thought, oh, well, everything's going to be great now, right? No, she was still treated like a black woman. And in 2020 is when she just realized, she's like, no matter what you do, you can do all the right things. You can check all the boxes and you still are struggling. You still aren't treated like your peers. And her activism is what got her those 272 votes that beat the person that they thought would win. And she did it with less money. She also ran against Kathy McMorris Rogers at a congressional race and did better than the previous person who had ran against her that had Lisa Brown, which we love Lisa, she's our mayor now. But Natasha did better than Lisa with less money in rural community. And so they keep telling us that this isn't the right person or this isn't the right time. Don't believe them. Support your candidates, love on your candidates, believe in them. They don't always need the money. The money is important, don't get me wrong, but it's not the only thing. If that person is in community, if that person is organizing, if that person listens and talks and does, that's your candidate. Support them, find ways to get them out there.
Here's my advocacy story, and hopefully to inspire you. In 2015, the state legislature created, with majority support, the Cultural Access Program. And what they did is they granted their taxing authority to cities and counties to increase local taxes by a tiny, tiny amount for the purpose of creating a cultural fund to address issues of access. We know in science, heritage, and the arts programs, not everyone has the same access to engage and thereby benefit from it. If you lived here in King County in 2017, you may remember, because it required a public vote, that Proposition 1, Access for All, went before the voters to increase our taxes by 0.1% sales tax for the purpose of creating this cultural fund. We lost by 4,500 votes. At that time, I was a board member for Cultural Access Washington. That was one of the entities that later became Inspire Washington. And in 2017, now that stunning loss, there's a lot of reasons why we lost. That is a whole panel in itself. But we needed to chart a path forward, and we needed to make sure at the heart of it that we created an equitable program. How do you distribute tens of millions of dollars to our 39 cities and towns across King County in a fair way? That was the challenge, and that's when I became executive director for this organization. We had to go back to the legislature. We had to change the law. We did that over 2 legislative sessions. It took a lot of conversation. There are obstacles in our way. But we eventually changed the law to open up so that communities had more control over how to invest those monies. Local government knows best what their communities need, and we were prepared. On March 5th, we got our amendment to the law, and we were so excited in 2020 to be on the ballot in November. Yes, but then the week later, all my cultural partners are calling and saying, I think we're going to be shut down, and that was just crazy. And then our work changed. I will share, it says what the uncomfortable things. I took on an effort that had a lot of bad, and legitimate shade. I had to make the circle with my cultural partners and apologize a lot and try to inspire them about how we could make this better and how we could eventually succeed and how they could find success in a new program. But then the pandemic happened and our work shifted to pandemic relief, a lot of federal advocacy, so much federal advocacy, and we worked and secured funding in different ways. But also, we never forgot that we needed to pull off cultural access in King County and for the benefit of the rest of the state. But we knew, because we were a weakened sector because of the pandemic, that we didn't know if we could mount a winning campaign. Ballot campaigns are expensive, and I was spending down all of our savings account just to be able to survive, to keep advocating for federal support. So we asked the legislature, it took us 3 legislative sessions, to give us councilmanic authority, allowing any city or county to choose before putting the issue on the ballot or approving it in council. We just wanted options. How did we do this? We did grassroots advocacy and direct lobbying. We took our state's 49 geographical legislative districts. We had 49 teams. We met with all the lawmakers. We kept talking about why this was important for every community across Washington to have this opportunity. And in 2023, they granted councilmanic access, authorization. And by the end of the year, we got King County to unanimously support the implementation of a cultural access program. What does that mean? It means that for all of you, for all of your households, you are paying a tiny amount of tax every year, just spread throughout the year through sales tax. It's $40 for each household, but it is generating, I don't take sales tax lightly though, but it is generating $100 million a year for cultural investment, and this is what you're paying for. Your cultural organizations are being given transformative funding to survive in a time when freedom of expression is under attack, when their expenses are going up and they need resources to be able to provide their valuable programs that will also lead to outcomes in education, mental health, and also local economy. Just last month, 200 applications were submitted for an exciting program called Launch, recognizing that even in King County, there are communities in Maple Valley and Snoqualmie that don't have cultural resource, so we can fund cultural startups to make sure that culture is as rich in those communities as it is in Capitol Hill in Seattle. $15 million is going to ensure that kids get access to free field trips and in-school residencies. The list goes on and on and on. We had to hold on to the dream. We had to advocate. We had to introduce legislation. We had to beg and plead. We had to lose a bunch of times, but inevitably, in the long game, we won. Advocacy matters. We could not have done this. The government can't create things like this. They need advocates, community-based ideas, to be able to implement a program like this. It's also why I needed a sabbatical. But check out Doors Open. That's what the program is called. Advocacy can work. Our next question is, how can philanthropists share power so that advocacy is led by communities most impacted? Share examples of collaborations. What is your vision for the future of philanthropy and advocacy? What changes and possibilities do you hope to see? Want to start on this side?
Does anybody feel so called?
Okay, great, thank you.
You gotta love these 5-part questions. I don't want to only send the message that if you choose to or have inherited, in some case, as the case may be, a vehicle that is limited to funding 501c3s, that you can't do advocacy work. I mentioned wellness grants, well-being grants, but there's a lot of other examples of what can happen. And thinking about at Sound Philanthropy, I mentioned that one of the roles we play with some of our clients is as staff. And so I also serve as CEO of Grousmont Foundation. And some of the ways that Grousmont is really exploring, leaning into, making bold choices around how they show up for grantees is, so a couple of examples, I'll sort of keep it high level, but I think one is really encapsulated by being nimble, being responsive and being nimble to needs that their grantees have. One of the grantee partners that we work there was a program where they needed to actually, in an expedited way, remove young men from this community for their physical safety, and called us. And within 24 hours, were able to submit a grant to them that allowed them to purchase 22 airline tickets around to different cities in the world that were going to host these young men and allow them to have some distance and some respite and some healing from the experiences that they'd had in their lives, and especially on the streets. Just last week, another grantee partner called and was looking to, had lost funding that had been promised by the city for a retreat for their organization, and was wondering if there was any way that that Grousemont could support the location. The venue of the retreat happened to be a venue that is partially or fully owned by this client. And so there was a self-dealing issue. There was a self-dealing issue, and the foundation couldn't address it. So one of the board members paid for the retreat out of his pocket in order for that to go forth, for that to happen, for this leadership to take place for this organization. I think that I want to echo something that Lilliane said, and that's been said by folks up on this panel, which is, communities have a solution. They have the solution that will work. The people who are working hard, who have been doing this, who are in generations, they're part of generations of leaders, of change makers, who have a plan. And so that's where investing in those leaders, investing in those plans without questioning, without inserting ourselves, showing up in any way we can that is supporting, that is championing, that is cheerleading them in that plan, whether it's wellness grants, whether it's unrestricted grant making, whether it's 5-year big bets. All of those ways are forms of advocacy. So I'll also go back to kind of my original thread around this idea of the philanthropic sector from a sort of structural and technical standpoint. And I think one way, and bear with me because it's a little bit of, I think the ultimate result is sharing power, but I think that changing the mindset and thereby the system of how financial assets turn into philanthropic dollars will go so far in true advocacy and true power sharing. If we can figure out how estate planning attorneys and CPAs and financial advisors can actually have a conversation with their clients that doesn't center around how can we get the most tax break for you, but actually centers around what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? What impact are you trying to have here? And how can we make that happen, regardless of tax? What would that look like? I mean, that would be amazing, right? And there is that power structure where philanthropy starts in those conversations is still very much imprisoned by the systemically racist system that we live in so many ways, and certainly in this way. And so I think that how can we, in our role, how can you all, in your positions, advocate through your conversations with advisors and challenge them to learn for themselves and to have these conversations with their clients? I'll leave it at that.
So I'd like to continue the theme of not having to know it all yourself, and that the people on the ground closest to the work are the experts, especially those with lived experience of the issue. We started Roots and Wings in 2020, and we wanted to do criminal justice reform, and I was tasked with figuring out what that meant and what to do. So I started asking some folks on the ground, and they would look at me and say, well, what part of criminal justice reform do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. Okay. But instead of waiting till we figured it out, we started funding a bunch of different groups, big, small, many of them led by Black and brown people of color who had been impacted by the justice system. And most of them were in Wisconsin. That was where we were focusing at that time. We do fund in Washington State, just to be clear, but we were doing a lot in Wisconsin. And after a while, some of the groups that we were funding asked if they could connect with others. So we brought about 20 of them together, 20 nonprofits together. And what happened was a surprise to us. Some of them, a lot of them said they had never had the chance to meet. They didn't even know about each other's organizations or the programs that they were providing. And so through this, we realized that there was this intense lack of infrastructure and community, even among the groups working in community. So we continued supporting that collaboration of groups in Wisconsin, and last year they became their own official entity. And this year, we did participatory grant making with them. And just last week, they decided where to grant $1 million to support criminal justice reform in Wisconsin. Thank you. And I'm pretty sure that if we as funders had started by thinking that we knew more than the people on the ground what to do, and that we were narrow in our strategy, that we would have missed the opportunity to learn alongside the justice community.
I think I'm like struggling with the sharing power piece, and maybe it depends on the day. Because I also think that in some ways, you know, we want this idea of sharing power, and I think there's so many inherent structures that are not going to fully allow for it. And I think acknowledging that is okay, and we can say that if you have the most money in the room, you have a different kind of power than the person who has the most lived experience in the room, right? Like, I think, and so I think some of the disruption around that, and it's not perfect, is that I do think that some of the sharing power is about not just the money. I think it's about the voice on the structures themselves, right? I think about so many community groups that are brought into the policy making at the very end, and are often given $5,000 to $10,000 to do outreach in their whole community, and then are told, well, how come you didn't get out every Latino voter in Central Washington? You were supposed to get them all out. We gave you $7,500. What happened? Right? And then the metric, the judgment, is then based on that, right? Without the acknowledgement of what does that actually mean if we're talking about, I'm not even going to go that, you know, if we're talking about 30 years, let's say, if we're talking about it's been like this for 10 years. And so I think sharing power is also sharing accountability and expectations of not just, and not just, you know, give more, but I think it's also the how we resource what needs to change. You know, I'm sitting very much with advocacy in 2026 is going to be terrible for groups, right? Like, I think we can expect more cuts, obviously, from the federal level, at the state level. You know, community groups have gone back over and over again to try to expand all kinds of programs. And we saw these huge cuts this year, and we can expect to see the same cuts next year. We can expect people advocating for school meals. Like, that's where we're at. And I was struck because, I don't know, years ago, talking about, it was like, if you talk about taxes, people are not going to get it, right? Like, no, some communities are just not going to understand it. And so I think sharing power is the piece around when we think about who, like, when we think about sophistication, who has the sophistication to talk about taxes and revenue and our state constitution? And we often separate those places, right? We're having one conversation with the legislator because they have certain power. We're having conversations with fellow donors in a different way with philanthropy than we're having with the promotora, the trusted worker who actually is out every single day and is getting resources to people and understands the impact, right, of what happens with our tax structure? What happens when we don't have revenue for school meals? And so I think the sharing power isn't so much just about, hey, I want to hear what you're saying, but what do we do with that? And also, where and with who are we having these conversations? And I just think there's a lot of discomfort in that, and that's what it's going to be. But the disruption is that the promotora who is spending, that trusted community health worker should be at the conversation about taxes, right? And so I think that, to me, I've been thinking about that more around like this idea of sharing power, not just through money, but about who we listen to, and what we do with that, right? Not just, okay, we listen to you, but what do we do with that? And was it even the right conversation? Do we just do it just to do it? Or are we actually putting stock in our communities and saying, we know you understand, let's have a real conversation about this?